This morning, videos are rolling in of law enforcement taking to the streets of, Saagar, get this, Georgetown.
Wow.
So if you've been here to DC, you know Georgetown as one of the more upscale neighborhoods, although it certainly had its problems, smash and grabs and all of that during the pandemic. So joining us to discuss all of this is Delano Squires. He is a research fellow over at the Heritage Foundation, but also somebody who has spent, unlike many conservatives who are now frothing at the mouth to talk about all of this, and people on the left as well. We're going to get into that. Delano has put in a lot of time actually working in DC. So Delano, first of all, thank you for coming. And secondly, just tell people, give them a little background on your career working for DC before you ended up at Heritage.
Yeah, so I worked in DC government for about 15 years, starting in 2007, always sort of in a public-facing arena. For most of that, I managed a technology program called Connect DC, where we help low-income residents get access to technology. So that means I spent a lot of time in public housing. I've been to DC jail at least 4 times, talking to guys who, as they were ready to transition back into the community. Doing a lot of stuff with senior citizens, with K through 12 students. And then the last year, I was in the Office of Gun Violence Prevention, which was a newly created office in the city. I think this was around 2020, 2021, obviously, with everything around George Floyd and BLM riots. The city wanted to approach gun violence from sort of a public health perspective, and they pulled together people from all across district agencies. So I was there, again, 2021 into 2022, interfacing with residents as they would call and complain about shootings and violence in their neighborhoods.
That was during the spike in DC.
Yes. One gentleman sent 10 videos from his security camera to the city capturing shootings in his neighborhood. I figured he lived in a house that cost at least $750,000.
Right.
So there were frustrations there from residents all across the city, about shootings and gun violence. So it really showed me the difference between what the activist class says, remember when they were on the defund the police train, and what residents, sometimes in the poorest parts of the city were saying, which is we want more police on the street.
Yeah, and I want to focus specifically on that, actually, because there's quite a bit of armchair quarterbacking going on. And even, frankly, probably from us, right? I've lived in D.C. for 15 years. I lived in, went to college in Foggy Bottom, which is, where the State Department is, and Northwest Washington. Never lived really outside of that, which traditionally has always been kind of the home of lesser crime, although it did, get quite a bit worse over like a 10-year period. So I'm curious, because at the end of the day, that doesn't matter. It really matters for the permanent residents, and particularly people in the poor areas. So I'm curious, before we even get to some of the media reaction, for your reaction to the way, first, the Trump administration's deployment, the conception behind it, and then how you have seen it played out now so far. We've only had one day, but there's been a lot of show of force, right?
Yes.
So what do you think so far?
Definitely not. And I'll say this, not only did I live in D.C. for 15 years, but work in D.C. for 15 years. I lived in D.C. for 5 years in Northeast D.C. in Ward 7 with my wife and our kids. So let me put my cards on the table. I was in favor of Operation Legend in the first Trump term that married—
Explain what that is.
Federal resources, so ATF, DOJ, DEA, and took those resources into a handful of cities, I think it was 8 cities across the country, to address violent street crime. I supported that. In fact, I said if I was advising the president, I would talk about that 5 times as much as the First Step Act.
Okay.
So I'm not opposed to sort of federal involvement in addressing local crime, generally speaking. I think the takeover, the fact that it was sort of precipitated by, obviously, the incident involving the Doge staffer, to me feels somewhat disjointed, because it's not that, there have been 45 minors under the age of 18 who've been shot and killed in D.C. over the last 2 years. We're marshaling federal resources to address that.
Yeah.
It's been, I think, a lot of the complaints, oftentimes for people who don't actually live in the city, that have been driving the narrative. That sort of rubs me the wrong way, but I mean, if it leads to better results for the residents and for people who work in the city and for people who visit the city, then I'm all for it. The show of force, and again, I've seen a few videos, ATF agents walking around Georgetown.
Yeah,
okay,
right.
I mean,
or the National Mall.
Right.
This is hard to explain because for most people on television or what like House of Cards, they're like, "Oh, it's the National Mall."
Right.
I'm like, nobody who lives. It's like Times Square. Nobody lives. I've been there in 5 years. Okay,
Right.
I have
I'm there
no
all the
reason to
time.
go. What are you
I
doing
ride my
down
bike.
there?
I ride
Okay,
my
all right. Other than exercise, like there's no reason to go down there. It's a place for tourists and for visitors. That's fine. Hey, they need to be safe as well. But there is no crime there either. Okay, and there hasn't been for many years. Yeah.
Generally speaking, and I think that's what a lot of people don't think about when they think about DC. They think about the mall and the Capitol and the White House and the Mint. But this is a city of 700,000 people in 8 wards, spread out across 4 different quadrants. And the violent crime tends to be clustered in a handful of neighborhoods, particularly the homicides and the shootings.
Yes.
60% happen, east of the Anacostia River in Ward 7 and Ward 8, the poorest parts of the city, the most disproportionately black parts of the city. And other parts of the city, again, you may have certainly assaults, robbery, carjacking that's sort of spread out a little bit more, but it's not the same as what you get sort of east of the river. So if the federal resources were being used to address crime in the highest crime parts of DC, I think that would be something different. And in fact, 2 years ago, Councilmember Trayon White, who represents Ward 8,
Once again,
once again, called for the National Guard in August. I think that request was ultimately, declined. But it's not to say that there aren't city leaders who have brought this issue up. But obviously, what you hear from the left is that, well, violent crime is on a steep decline. And while that may be the case, even including homicides and shootings, the question is, okay, where are we starting from?
Yeah.
Like I grew up in New York. In 92, there were 2,500 murders in New York.
yeah.
Now they're about, in a given year, 375 to 420, which obviously is a steep decline from the 1990s, but it's still, you're talking about concentrated areas where that is part of the local rhythm, like the everyday rhythm of life is hearing gunshots and knowing somebody, and including children, who get shot and killed in the streets.
Well, that's exactly what I want to focus on, because the Washington Post, before this was hyperpolarized because Trump took it on, it was a couple months ago, a sweeping investigation into the spike in truancy. And it's significant. I mean, it's still not back down below pandemic levels. It was already high before the pandemic. Huge problem. We've seen the, quote, teen takeovers of Navy Yard 3-4 times just in the last couple of months, where if people haven't, if you're not a local, you probably haven't seen the footage or the images from it, but it's literally hundreds of teenagers who go into the lobbies of apartment buildings. They were shooting Roman candles at the windows during the 4th of July, but actually creating a situation where the cops could not control the streets because they were totally overrun, basically.
Yeah.
So that, to me, if I look at the truancy, I look at what Donald Trump is doing with the show of force. Delano, it's what you were saying. What is going to address the kind of root cause? So basically, my question for you is, I actually think the show of force can probably do something. I think pushing the Metropolitan Police Department here to do something probably will make them better and will force them to finally confront some of their own failures. The statistics are being debated right now. There's a police commander who was suspended. This is C4. We can put it on the screen, for cooking the books. The police union says the books are being cooked. It's hard to know exactly what the numbers are. But all that to say, it seems like there's just a lot more that the Trump administration could be doing that's not sending people in net gaiters and bulletproof vests onto the National Mall.
And let me say this because I want to be fair to the Bowser administration, right? Mayor Bowser, to her credit, and I think she's on her 3rd term now, to her credit, is not Bill de Blasio. I don't think she uttered the words defund the police one time in 2020. Now, I will be critical in this sense. I think she caved to the BLM activists by making Black Lives Matter Plaza, which I saw as somewhat of a troll for towards President Trump in 2020.
Right. Totally.
And they hate her anyway, right? Partly because she is pro-police.
Right.
So I think the city has tried to do a lot to address, gun violence, and again, spent millions of dollars in resources to try to, bring these numbers down, and they have come down. But from my perspective, and just given the things that I research in terms of, family structure, the stuff about truancy and chronic absenteeism, while an issue nationwide, when you have schools, high schools in DC, where the chronic absenteeism, the truancy rate is like 90%.
It's insane.
That is first and foremost a problem with the family.
Right.
Yeah.
And part of the issue, and I address this, and I would bring this up periodically, even when I was in the city, is like, okay, we have 12, 13, 14, 15-year-olds carjacking people, shooting people. But the first adults that come up for an accountability check are the mayor, the police chief, and the school superintendent. That is completely out of order, right? So what I would love to hear an elected official say is something to the effect of, look, we're doing everything we can to address crime, but it is not our responsibility to parent your children. That's your job. Because if you can't control them, how would you expect me to control them? They live in your house. They're under your rules. I would hope at some point, some mayor somewhere, some police chief somewhere would say something to that effect and galvanize the community to take responsibility for their children, our children, in ways that help address some of these issues. Because it can't just be root causes being a euphemism for more spending on the library, 24-hour rec center, just keeping kids busy 24/7, which again, look, I know what it's like.
Not a horrible thing,
right?
But not going to solve the problem.
But let me say it this way. We do not apply that same framework when it's other types of crimes. I've never heard a Democrat or progressive say, man, if only those, Klan members had more jobs and economic opportunity in 1940s, maybe they wouldn't have terrorized black neighborhoods. No, nobody says that. They only do it when it comes to urban crime and when it comes to low-income black populations. And I believe people have more agency in than that, but they have to be called up and activated to do what needs to be done.
Well, at the same time, and I appreciate this. This is actually more of a nuanced conversation. We're not sitting here fluffing the Trump administration. We're like, there's some major issues happening, but we're not going to sit here and gaslight everybody and say there's no problem. But that's unfortunately what a lot of the media has done on this. So here we have MSNBC's Symone Sanders. Let's take a listen. We'll get your reaction.
That it is perceived violence amplified by some actual real acts of violence. But the way I've heard DC being described this morning is like it's a city under siege, like it's a dangerous place, clutching your pearls. You got to keep your bag under your dress when you leave the house. And that's just not true. What we are talking about, though, is these instances of juvenile crime. But my concern is that the president is using instances of juvenile crime in the city of Washington, D.C. as a pretext for what I would describe as his authoritarian overreach. When you walk down the streets of Georgetown, you don't see a police officer on every corner, but you don't feel unsafe. So what is it about talking about places like Southeast D.C., right, Ward 8, if you will, that people say, well, we need more officers to make us safe? I think we have to rethink what safety means in America.
All right, so this is why the pretext of this matters, right? So she said, when you walk down the streets of Georgetown, again, the richest neighborhood, probably statistically the richest neighborhood in all of Washington, D.C., you don't see a cop on every corner. Now apparently you do, because the Trump administration is not there. They don't need to be there. There's nothing going on. But that is a level of not just like paternalism, but also of denial, which just completely absconds the entire problem, right?
Yeah, and my frustration when I see that, is these are the same people that claim that they speak for the black community, right? Now, again, most of the homicides, I mean, when I worked in the Office of Gun Violence Prevention, every morning we would start with a call from the assistant police chief going through the contact shootings the last 24 or 72 hours if we were coming off a weekend. 99% of the time, young black male, young black male, young black male. But when Symone Sanders and Roland Martin and other people in sort of the Afrostocracy, right, the sort of black progressive elites, when they talk, they are only interested in mobilizing federal resources if you're investigating, what you think is a noose in a NASCAR garage with Bubba Wallace, if you're investigating Jussie Smollett, if Joe Biden is saying that the greatest threat to America is white domestic terrorism, then they'll say we need the federal government to marshal all of its resources to address these problems. So they are more concerned with fake hate crimes than real street crimes. And the reason is because for the left and the right, the primary role that the black community plays within sort of the criminal justice ecosystem is often victims of a racist system and not victims of violent crime. And that's why people like Symone Sanders can say with a straight face, oh, it's not that bad, and why are there more police in Southeast than there are in Georgetown? Well, that's where the shootings occur.
Yeah.
Right? That is where the shootings occur. So when I see that type of thing, it frustrates me deeply. I'll give you a quick story. When I was still in DC, there was an activist. He went by the name C-Web, who had been tracking homicides just in his neighborhood, like over by the convention center, right? Since the 1990s. He had a brick wall full of names and faces of guys who had been shot and killed just in that sort of 2-block radius. And he told me part of the reason he does it is because he mentors some of these guys' children. And these are some of the only photos and videos that they've ever seen of their father. So he had been doing it 20 plus years. So when I hear, again, these sort of, pundits trying to sweep these issues under the rug, it frustrates me deeply.
Well, then let's talk about this 30-year. So this is a new talking point. DC violent crime is at a 30-year low. Now, first of all, as you just said, the police commanders are on investigation for juking the stats. So who knows whether that's even true. But at the context that you've laid out, we still have a lot of murders compared to New York. I believe it's the highest in the entire United States, or one of the highest among U.S. cities at a per capita basis. And even then, just focusing on murders does not address quality of life crime.
Absolutely.
I've always talked about this with San Francisco. San Francisco doesn't have a ton of murders. Go visit. It's not nice.
That's a good
Now,
point.
why is it not nice?
Yeah.
Car crime, property theft, heroin, drug addiction everywhere. So just contextualize, I think, what it means for the DC resident and for others for what the problem is at a crime level, at a quality of life level, and then what does a solution actually look like? Because look, the show of force and the activists and all that, that's going to happen no matter what. But people here, if you actually want to know what you could do about it, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think you raise a good point,
Yeah.
right? The quality of life stuff is separate and related, but separate from the violent crime. As you said, I mean, they're porch pirates. So if you go on Ring in the community, it's like, okay, another package is stolen. It's the carjackings, right? It's the assaults. Sometimes it's just the intimidation. It's the homelessness. It's the vagrancy.
Yes.
These are things that frustrate people, and these are things that drive people, away and make them move to Virginia or Maryland. I think addressing each of the issues, sort of comprehensively makes sense, but each of them has their own set of root causes. Again, with the youth crime, parents have to be held to account. I'm not saying that they have to be arrested, but I mean, a mayor or a police chief can at least start by talking about the importance of family as it relates to addressing this particular issue. Some of the other stuff, I might be more radical than most.
That's fine, lay it out.
Let's hear it.
Yeah.
I have, and some certain ideas I only talk about with my wife, because I'm like, look, I would be open to at least putting the idea on the table of rounding up known gang members and saying, look, guys, if you guys are hell-bent on hurting each other, we'll go somewhere else where you can do that. You can sign the waivers. You can have the whatever level of force you all agree to. We can have it out. But we're not going to allow you to terrorize this neighborhood where 3-year-olds and toddlers and senior citizens are the ones who get caught in the crossfire because you guys, one, have no respect for yourself.
I mean, you're talking about The Wire. This is season 3 of The Wire.
Yeah.
It's season now in Anacostia.
Yeah.
Right. So I would be open to that. Right. Might not pass legal muster, but I'd at least be open to the idea. And I think, again, I'm fine with the zero tolerance policy for vagrancy and some of these other quality of life crimes. I know a lot of people don't like that, but I think law-abiding, tax-paying citizens have a right to live in neighborhoods that are clean and orderly. And getting there is not always going to feel comfortable. Like I saw one of the videos that was circulating yesterday, you had some federal agents look like they were walking through an alley. They come up on, a group of, it might have been 2 or 3 young black men. And then, hey guys, you have your ID. Now most people don't carry ID when they're, on their porch. It was a very respectful interaction. The federal officer was basically explaining what this initiative was. But I've seen many that aren't nearly as respectful. Yeah. And this
that
is where
needs to be exactly.
This is where the nuance comes in.
Yeah.
And part of my concern is that you have conservatives talking about life in blue cities the way liberals talk about life in the deep South.
I think that's very smart.
Right.
Yeah.
And what it does is it conditions not just a sense of fear, which I felt palpably when I was driving my family from DC to Texas through Mississippi and saying, oh my gosh, what if I get stopped in sundown town? That had been conditioned in me. I grew up in New York. I don't know anything about Mississippi.
Yeah.
But I don't want families who are coming here from Iowa or Wisconsin to think as soon as I step off the Greyhound or the Amtrak that I'm gonna get mugged and murdered.
Greyhound, that might happen.
Well,
yeah.
No, on the Greyhound.
Yeah.
But it's not just the fear that it conditions, but it makes it easier to say these are not real Americans like us.
I understand.
And we're willing to do whatever it takes.
Yeah.
To sort of make this problem go away.
Yeah.
And so this is my last question, because one of the things that Symone Sanders gets at is the age-old debate between the sort of presence of law enforcement and whether or not crime is going to go down because you have more cops in the street with stop and frisk or whatever it is, broken windows. All of these, I mean, the progressive left basically tried their experiment as backlash to those policies in San Francisco and Oakland, and the experiment has been a failure to the point where even its own proponents have walked back. Muriel Bowser here in DC gave in to a lot of progressing policing policy ideas and walked some of them back. She's even walking back the sanctuary city status now as well, to the extent that she kind of can. So is there, though, a risk? I mean, just Steel Manning, the way that we, and probably all three of us think about this, is there a risk that a militarized police force, which a lot of like libertarian-leaning conservatives already don't like, is there a risk that that makes the problem worse in any way? Or is it only going to, from your perspective, help?
I don't see it making the problem worse. That doesn't mean that it'll necessarily help. Again, one of the things I liked about Operation Legend, again, back in the first Trump term, is that they were using, it wasn't just to show of force on the streets, it was the intelligence, it was the prosecution that was getting, not just bad guys, but murderers off the street. So if federal resources were used sort of to help in investigations, closing cases, I think that's a lot different than just the show of force and having agents on the street, particularly if they're just walking around with their hands in their pockets, in Georgetown or Navy Yard. So I don't think it'll necessarily make it worse. That doesn't mean it'll make it better. One of the things that I've often said is like, look, people like Symone Sanders and other folks on the left are very much pro-police. They either live in gated communities, right, or they have security guards, or they pay for private security. The only people who I legitimately believe are open to the police going away are guys who are in the streets. So whether you're a street gang, organized crime, or you're related to someone or friends with someone who handles their own business in the streets. Everybody else, from noise complaints to if a homeless person is sitting on your front porch, 911, can you? So I don't believe this notion that they don't think that police matter. It takes more than just police on the streets, because, criminals are not smart in the sense that they're engaging in dangerous activities, but they're smart enough to know, okay, we know the police surge between 3 p.m. and 7 p.m. When the sun goes down, they go home, we come out and we terrorize the streets. So I think a lot of it is about the coordination. And when I was in DC, they would say this frequently, that DC is resource rich, but coordination poor. When you add the federal layer on top of that, that could make the problem worse in that no one knows exactly what it is that they're supposed to be doing. But I think there's a potential to make it better if, again, those federal resources, the advanced technology, more prosecutors can help close cases and bring some level of closure to victims and their families.
Well, I really appreciate joining us, man. I really learned a lot, and I hope the audience found it helpful. So thank you for joining us.
Absolutely.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.